The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a heavy, rhythmic finality of a judge's gavel. For 42 years, that clock had kept the heartbeat of Eleanor's home. It had watched her husband, Arthur, carry her over the threshold. It had watched her children, Sarah and David, take their first stumbling steps across the oak floorboards. Now it was watching those same children pack her life into cardboard boxes. "It's just practical, Mom," Sarah said, her voice sharp and clinical, devoid of the warmth Eleanor had poured into her for 35 years. Sarah stood by the front door, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, holding out a perfectly manicured hand. "You can't maintain a 4-bedroom house by yourself anymore. The stairs are a hazard, the market is peaking, it's time." Across the living room, David was staring intently at his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. He was Arthur's mirror image, but without the soul. When Arthur passed away from a sudden stroke 6 months prior, he had left behind a sizable life insurance policy and a healthy liquid savings account. David, an investment banker whose lifestyle always seemed to outpace his income, had immediately assumed power of attorney. He had woven a web of legal jargon, claiming it was necessary to protect Eleanor from estate taxes. In reality, he had funneled the entirety of Arthur's life's work into a high-risk offshore portfolio under his own name. "David has secured your finances, and the sale of this house will clear my debts. I mean, our family debts," Sarah continued, her impatience flaring. "The assisted living facility is already paid for the first 3 months. It's a lovely place, Mom. They have bingo on Tuesdays." Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. At 71, she possessed a quiet, titanium dignity that her children had inherited the benefits of, but never the blueprint for. She looked at her daughter's outstretched hand. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Eleanor unhooked the heavy brass keys from her lanyard. The metal clinked softly as she dropped them into Sarah's palm. "You have everything, then?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady, though her chest felt hollowed out. "Everything that matters," David muttered, without looking up from his screen. But David was an arrogant man, and arrogant men are notoriously sloppy. In his haste to seize the bank accounts and transfer the deed to the suburban home, he had entirely dismissed one single line item in Arthur's will. It was a 50-acre parcel of land out in Oak Haven County, 3 hours away. It was a property Arthur had inherited from his grandfather. To David and Sarah, it was a joke, a barren, sun-scorched tract of dead dirt that produced nothing but tumbleweeds and property taxes. They hadn't even bothered to transfer the title, leaving it in Eleanor's name to avoid the liability of the back taxes. They assumed Eleanor would meekly take the shuttle to the sterile linoleum-floored assisted living facility. They were wrong. When Sarah and David drove away in their luxury SUVs, Eleanor didn't wait for the facility transport. Instead, she picked up her single weathered suitcase, walked 3 blocks to the local bus station, and bought a one-way ticket to Oak Haven. The journey was long, the bus rattling over cracked highways as the city skyscrapers bled into endless horizons of dry, golden brush. When Eleanor finally stepped off the bus at the rural crossroads, the silence of the country wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She walked the last 2 miles to the property, the dust coating her sensible orthopedic shoes. When she arrived, the sight would have broken a lesser woman. The 50 acres were a desolate wasteland of cracked earth. In the center sat a rusted, collapsed 1970s mobile home, its windows shattered, the aluminum siding peeling like dead skin. There was no running water, no electricity, just the whispering wind and the smell of dry sage. Eleanor dropped her suitcase in the dust. She walked over to the cracked earth, knelt down with a groan from her arthritic knees, and dug her bare fingers into the soil. It was bone dry on top, but 3 inches down, it was cool. It was dark. Arthur had told her a secret about this land decades ago, a secret David was too greedy to read about, and Sarah was too self-absorbed to care about. Eleanor looked up at the setting sun, a fierce, glowing amber light reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. "All right, Arthur," she whispered to the empty fields. "Let's get to work."
The first 3 weeks were an exercise in brutal, quiet endurance. Eleanor lived inside the skeleton of the rusted airstream, sleeping on a damp-proof cot and eating cold canned soup by the light of a single kerosene lantern. At night, the temperature plummeted and the wind howled through the shattered windows like a chorus of ghosts. But Eleanor did not break. Every morning at dawn, she walked the perimeter of her 50 acres, clutching a frayed, yellow geological survey map that Arthur had kept hidden in his old cedar desk. Arthur had been a quiet man, an amateur geologist who spent his weekends studying topography. Years ago, he had excitedly told Eleanor that his grandfather's worthless patch of dust sat directly atop a geological anomaly, a massive trapped artesian aquifer sealed tight beneath a thick slab of subterranean limestone. It was millions of gallons of pristine, ice-cold glacial water, entirely cut off from the drought-stricken county above. With the last $5,000 from her personal checking account, the only money David hadn't managed to intercept, Eleanor hired a grizzled, skeptical local driller named Mac. "Ma'am, I've drilled Oak Haven for 30 years, Mac had told her, leaning against his dusty rig. "There ain't nothing under this rock but more rock. You're throwing your pension down a dry hole." "Just drill where the map says, Mac," Eleanor replied softly, handing him the cash. 55 feet down, not a foot less. For 3 days, the heavy diamond-tipped drill ground into the earth, screaming against the limestone. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, Mac was packing up his gear, shaking his head. They had hit 53 feet. Nothing, just chalky, blinding dust. Eleanor stood her ground, her arms crossed against the brutal sun. 2 more feet, she demanded. Mac sighed, fired the rig back up, and pushed the lever. At 55 feet, the drill engine suddenly choked. A deep rumbling groan echoed from beneath their feet, vibrating through the soles of Eleanor's shoes. Seconds later, a deafening hiss tore through the silence. A column of crystal-clear, ice-cold water erupted 50 feet into the burning sky, raining down on the cracked earth. Mac fell backward into the mud, his jaw slacked in absolute shock. Eleanor just stood there, letting the freezing water wash over her face, washing away the betrayal, the grief, and the dust of the last 6 months. She looked up at the sky and smiled. Arthur had been right. In a county plagued by a decade-long drought, water wasn't just a resource, it was liquid gold. Within a month, Eleanor had secured a highly lucrative contract, leasing a portion of her water rights to the state's agricultural department for millions, while keeping the majority for herself. Over the next 18 months, Oak Haven underwent a staggering transformation. The barren wasteland was terraformed into a sprawling high-tech agricultural utopia. Eleanor erected acres of climate-controlled commercial greenhouses, cultivating rare organic saffron and high-yield heirloom crops that Michelin-star restaurants and pharmaceutical companies fought over. Where the rusted airstream once sat, a stunning modern eco-ranch house now stood, overlooking endless rows of vibrant emerald green. Eleanor, at 73, had become a self-made agricultural tycoon. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, the universe was busy balancing its scales. David's arrogance had finally caught up with him. The offshore portfolio where he had hidden Arthur's life savings collapsed overnight in a brutal foreign market crash. Worse, his aggressive shell game tactics had triggered an audit by the SEC. His accounts were frozen, his luxury cars were repossessed, and he was staring down the barrel of federal embezzlement charges. Sarah was faring no better. She had used the money from the sale of Eleanor's house to float a massive real estate venture that went completely bankrupt. Drowning in debt and facing foreclosure on her own home, Sarah was desperate. Sitting in his bleak, half-empty apartment, a panicked David frantically searched through public property registries, looking for any hidden asset he could liquidate to pay for a defense attorney. His eyes scanned the screen until they landed on a forgotten line item. Oakhaven County, 50 acres, deed holder, Eleanor Vance. David scoffed, remembering the worthless dirt, but when he clicked on current county tax assessment, his breath hitched in his throat. The screen blurred. He blinked, leaning closer to the monitor. The property was actively appraised at $22.5 million.
David's hands shook so violently he could barely dial Sarah's number. When she answered, her voice was thick with exhausted tears, but David cut her off before she could speak. "Sarah, pack a bag. We're going to Oakhaven," he practically shouted, his voice trembling with manic desperation. "That worthless dirt Mom kept, she struck water. It's a commercial farm now. It's worth $22 million. She's senile, Sarah. We can declare her incompetent, take power of attorney, and liquidate the farm to clear our debts. We're saved." 2 days later, a dusty rental sedan pulled up to the heavy wrought iron gates of Vance Oasis Farms. David and Sarah stepped out, squinting against the bright sun. They expected to find their mother wandering aimlessly, overwhelmed by whatever stroke of dumb luck had transformed the land. Instead, the gate buzzed open and a sleek electric golf cart rolled down the manicured driveway. Driving it was not a frail, confused old woman. Eleanor wore a sharp, tailored linen suit, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and an aura of absolute authority. Beside her sat a man in a crisp suit, holding a leather briefcase. Eleanor stopped the cart a few feet from the gate, remaining on her side of the iron bars. She looked at her children. They looked awful. Haggard, panicked, their expensive clothes rumpled and stained with desperation. "Mom," Sarah cried, rushing to the gate, grabbing the iron bars like a prisoner. "Mom, it's so good to see you. We've been so worried. The facility said you never arrived." "You never called to check," Eleanor replied, her voice as cool and clear as the artesian water beneath her feet. "Mom, listen," David interrupted, pushing his way forward, forcing a slick, practiced smile. "We heard about the farm. It's incredible, but managing a multi-million-dollar agricultural estate is too much for you at your age. The stress isn't healthy. As your power of attorney, I've prepared documents to transfer the operational control to me. I can manage the liquidation." "You don't have power of attorney," David said softly. David's smile faltered. "Yes, I do. The estate documents." Eleanor nodded to the man beside her. He stepped forward and pulled a pristine white document from his briefcase, holding it up for David to read through the bars. "My name is Marcus Thorne, Chief Legal Counsel for Vance Oasis Farms. Your power of attorney was specifically tied to the liquid assets of Arthur Vance's estate, assets which you have since criminally squandered. It did not cover real property held solely in Eleanor Vance's name. Furthermore, given your current federal indictment for embezzlement, any attempt to claim fiduciary control over Eleanor's assets is legally laughable." David's face drained of color. He gripped the bars, his knuckles turning white. Mom, please, they're going to put me in prison. I lost everything. Sarah is bankrupt. We are your children. You have $20 million. You have to help us." Sarah began to sob openly. "Mom, I have nowhere to go. They're taking my house tomorrow. Please." Eleanor looked at them. For a brief, fleeting second, the mother in her heart ached to reach through the bars and hold them. But she remembered the ticking grandfather clock. She remembered the cold dismissal in David's eyes. She remembered the heavy brass keys dropping into Sarah's palm. Eleanor reached into her pocket. She pulled out a heavy brass key, the key to the old rusted airstream that she had dragged to the edge of the property outside the estate gates.
She tossed the key through the bars. It landed in the dust at Sarah's feet with a dull clink. "You can't maintain your houses anymore," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a quiet, devastating whisper. "The trailer is dry. It's just practical. It's time." Without waiting for a response, Eleanor turned the golf cart around and drove slowly back up the beautiful emerald-lined driveway, leaving her children screaming into the dust, holding nothing but a piece of brass they couldn't sell.
Every story we share here is a piece of a lived truth, finally whispered out loud. If today's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to Quiet Drama Stories and leave a like. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your support ensures that these quiet voices are finally heard. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are never as alone as you feel. See you in the next story.